The Alec Baldwin case, where a cinematographer was fatally shot during the making of a movie, leaves a lot up for questioning. Today, we're speaking with a local personal injury attorney about his thoughts on the case. The attorneys at Ashton Price are advocates for personal injury and wrongful death victims in Northern and Central California. Today, we have Craig Fontaine Ashton, founding partner of Ashton Price. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So I wanted to start off with the Alec Baldwin case. Can you talk about the background of this case?
Sure. So it's kind of going through the machinations of the legal process. So ultimately, on October 21st, 2021, on a Western, unbelievably, it sounded like a rom-com. This is a Western with guns. There was lack of supervision by an armorer, an assistant director, and ultimately Alec Baldwin, where a live bullet got into a real gun that was being used as a prop during a rehearsal to determine camera angles, and Alec Baldwin's gun went off, and it ultimately killed the cinematographer, Halna Hutchins. And so that's how we got here. He ended up having two kind of tracks of legal issues. One was civil. If you remember O.J. Simpson, he was acquitted on the criminal side, but then had a $30 million judgment from the civil side, which is a wrongful death. So Alec Baldwin has basically settled most of the civil money damages cases, but now because he could not stay off social media, and he was showing himself looking forlorn in a restaurant, and he's got 7 kids now, and he's got his wife, Hilaria, who wants 1 million Instagram followers. He kept putting it out in the media that his life was great. His kids were happy, that they're having a great time on Halloween, and that he's really struggling, and kind of not taking into consideration the family that lost a mother and lost a wife. And so he got charged with 2 counts of negligent homicide.
Yeah, and it's a tragic case. What would you say with the results that have been happening? What did this result in?
So basically, here's the problem. He kind of, because he kept going out on social media, he gave the impetus to the district attorney to file charges. And so the charges that were filed ultimately could have led to a 5-year mandatory prison sentence because a gun was in use. But because he got good lawyering, Alex Spiro, who's Elon Musk's attorney, took over and pointed out that because the law was passed in May of 2022, you can't apply it retroactively in terms of the enhancement for the gun. So now he's facing 18 months in prison for voluntary manslaughter. And basically what's probably going to happen is that he's going to plead to a misdemeanor like David Halls did, who is the assistant director, for essentially basically have supervised basically probation.
Yeah, and Craig, you mentioned the term good lawyering. How does that apply to this case?
So what happened in this case is that you got the district attorney file the charges, and then what happened was that they pointed out that the special prosecutor had run for the legislature, and she couldn't be in the executive branch and the legislature at the same time because she got elected. She was removed, and then they pointed out what's called ex post facto, which in the 1700s we passed in this country. You cannot apply a law retroactively in a criminal setting. And so they were trying to apply a 5-year penalty to a crime that happened before the law was changed. And so that good lawyering got the special prosecutor removed and ultimately got the ex post facto constitutional issues presented. And now instead of facing 5 years in prison, he's facing 18 months. Based upon the fact that there's pressure being put on by the good lawyering, it's likely that he'll plead guilty to a misdemeanor, have basically probation, which will be supervised, and that will be the outcome that the assistant director got.
Okay, and Alec Baldwin pleaded not guilty to involuntary manslaughter in February, which means exactly what now?
So basically, he pled not guilty, which is an arraignment, so he's out on his own recognizances. The only thing is he can't interact with the witnesses, but the unique thing is they went back to start shooting again. So some of the people that are on the set are still working with him, so he did have that codicil that he could interact with them in a professional way. And he can't have a firearm or use alcohol. So now he's got a preliminary hearing, which is basically May 3rd, and he basically was able to get out of having to attend. And that's essentially presenting evidence to the judge to make sure that there's enough evidence to move forward beyond a reasonable doubt to prove this crime.
What do you think might be the next steps in this case?
So the next steps in this case ultimately are Alec Baldwin will not be at the preliminary hearing. I think the judge will say he can't move forward to trial. I think there are some risks now for the individuals that are elected, which is the prosecutor, a district attorney, who's probably not going to want the reputational harm of losing this case. And I think probably what's going to happen is Alec Baldwin will plead guilty to a misdemeanor like David Halls, who was assistant director. Instead of a felony, he'll get probation, it'll be unsupervised, and he'll move on with his life.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, and it's an unfortunate case that happened. What would you like viewers to take away from this case?
Well, it doesn't apply to all of us, but anything that we do, you got to use common sense. And when you are on a Western with a gun, do not have bullets around. That is for sure. Dude, you should never have live ammunition anywhere around a movie set with guns. But anything that you do, whether it's driving a car or whether or not you're having people over for a barbecue, just use reasonable care and make sure it's safe, because therefore there won't be any legal liability for anything bad that happens.
Yeah, and what services does your firm provide, Ashton Price?
So we've been around for 26 years in Sacramento, and I started practicing law with Melvin Belli, believe it or not, in the late 80s in San Francisco. So what we do is anybody who has been wronged by somebody else that looks for compensation as a result of the wrong, usually physically to them, then we can help shepherd them through the process. Once they get us involved, we help them focus on their physical well-being, and we take care of everything else.
All right. Well, all helpful information. Craig, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
You bet. And for more information, you can go to ashtonandprice.com.